Hello and welcome. I'm Kevin Decker. Thank you all for joining our event today, Thursday at 3. We have a couple of guests with us, Richard Culbertson, as well as Mark Knight. We'll be discussing with ALN CEO Jim Dieter. But before we get started, I just want to take a moment and thank our patron members, as well as our organizational members. We're very thankful that this list of members keeps growing and growing. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to do any of our programs, including our summit that just wrapped up yesterday. There's a lot of good content from that. If you missed it, keep an eye out on the email list and on the website. And the content from Tuesday and Wednesday summit will be available. On a final note, before we begin, the chat is open, so feel free to leave questions and comments in there, and we can try to expand our discussion from that. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jim Dieter.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. And thanks to Mark and Rich for joining us today. A couple notes before we start. First, I have to say, happy St. Patrick's Day. Because I got a sort of green sweater on. I don't know about you guys. Is that green, Rich, or not? That's just blue.
Oh, I have a few green stripes, blue stripes there, as well as a yellow stripe.
Well, there you go.
I don't have any orange stripes though.
And I want to mention that our originally scheduled guest was unable to be here today. But the original intent was remains the same, to discuss the summit this week. Of course, always an open-ended discussion, so we'll see where we end up. But we want to look back on this week. And on that note, I would say this was our first summit that we have done. Before times, we were pretty much a one event a year in person was our event schedule. And through COVID times, we continued to build our presence, through the year, through various virtual events. Who knows, maybe this year we'll, if the next wave doesn't get us, we'll be able to get back to having some in-person or hybrid events. But the idea was each quarter to have a summit and each month have a roundtable. So this was our first summit. And first, I also want to say congratulations and thanks to Mike Bordenaro, who can't be with us today. He's in the air, flying back to Chicago from the coast. But Mike did a great job of envisioning and pulling this all together. All right, I think that's all my background stuff. So Mark, Rich, hello, how are you guys doing?
It's a great day here in Pittsburgh.
It's a gray day here in Boston, but I have the most green of all of you, I think, but you can't see it because it's hanging behind me on the wall so that the fake background works.
Well, that's great. That's great.
I have some Irish blood in me, so that's even better.
Yeah, I used to say I was half Irish and half German on both sides of my family, and then we got the testing, and it turns out my heritage is slightly more complex than that. But nothing totally unexpected. Just as it turns out, those Vikings came to Ireland and stayed.
Yeah, I have some blood in me as well. I'm sorry, Mark.
No, I was saying my son took one of those, and the results were kind of eye-opening. But obviously, the UK was just the Vikings, the French. I mean, pretty much everybody attacked it at some point, and people stayed behind. So it's just a huge mixture of genes.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the summit. So let's start with kind of general reactions. You want to go first, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, my reactions will be a bit spotty because I think, like probably all of us, my calendar is a little insane and has been for the last 2 years. So, you know, most days are probably 75% of my time is on the phone, just trying to jump in and out and find times to get on interesting things like the summit. But I guess we should start just reaffirming the topic in terms of, you know, infrastructure being intended to support human flourishing. So to me, you know, that immediately puts the emphasis on what types of infrastructure, the challenge of infrastructure, the sheer headache of managing all of that when we start breaking it down into what's involved. But then human flourishing gets us into sustainability. And I think all of those topics came up throughout all the sessions to various degrees. Actually got me thinking about, if you've seen that, it's like 7 years old, the John Oliver Last Week Tonight, about infrastructure. Yeah, and basically how boring it is to maintain, but it may be boring, but it's absolutely critical, I think, as a foundation for society. He actually defined it as stuff that can be destroyed in an action movie, which is a little off the wall in terms of what we're looking at, I think. But I think, you know, transportation, energy. One thing I didn't recall seeing in any of the sessions, at least while I was on them, was dams. You know, I didn't see dams mentioned on the GAO presentation, but I guess we can kind of work through them, yeah, maybe one at a time and look at that. But yeah, I think a lot of the infrastructure we have is unfortunately in dire need of some TLC. And in terms of flourishing, I think looking at that from a perspective, you know, or through a sustainability lens, there's no better time to start doing that than now.
And the only better time than now is 20 years ago, right?
Yes, you know, can't change what's been done though. We can only keep moving forward.
Rich, how about you? You have any general thoughts to sort of?
Yeah, I think there were several themes, and sometimes these were consistent themes, you know, through most of the speakers. And that is, it's all about community. It's communities which are being served by infrastructure, but it's also asset management communities that try to address serving other communities. And it appears, though, is that this is not something that one hero is able to do, that it takes a community to actually go ahead and pull this off, particularly to sustain asset management, to recognize what it is, to get a handle on it. One of the comments that came out of the Michigan group, they were trying to get together and trying to figure out how to get a handle of all the communities in Western Michigan. And they had a database, they had a charter from the governor, I guess his name was Snyder, and later turned into Whitmer. And they looked at that and they found, you know, we need to find some guy named Bob, because they thought Bob would have all the answers. They found out they did find a Bob, but Bob died. But he also died with all those answers. And they found a lot of communities where they, in fact, the answers were with various Bobs. And what they recognized that was not a good thing to do, because they actually needed some centralized data in order to make good decisions. And but they were able to pull that off with a number of communities and such. And they also mentioned that once they had the data together, then they were able to save money. You know, for example, if you're dealing with utilities, if you have the water company digging up streets, you have the gas company digging up streets, the sewer people digging up streets. It's better they do that sequentially or all at once, where they don't pave over it multiple times, because obviously that those costs go into rate bases, and in fact it's waste. But they were able to save money by establishing the community, saving the good data, and saving money for the communities. So the community would have other benefits other than repeated paved over streets. But I think that hit me probably about as much as anything. But there were other themes that I thought that were consistent among the speakers.
One of the things I liked about that Michigan presentation as well, and to your point, Rich, they had culture building emphasized on one of their slides, and I think that is a big thing in terms of community development, both, as you said, both within the asset management community, but in broader terms as well. And culture is it's a difficult thing to change. So having people focused on actually improving asset management culture within a whole state, I think, is a good initiative to take.
So let me ask you, Mark. I have a lot of different thoughts about the culture question, but do you think using the ISO 55000 principles, maybe particularly stakeholder involvement, makes some of that culture stuff easier?
Does it make it easier? I don't know that it makes it easier. It gives us it puts it on the radar to start with. It gives us a framework to start addressing it, I think. It's interesting that you say that, though, because on a project a couple of years ago, we were working with an electric utility, and going through the 39 areas of asset management, that IAM and GFMAM have laid out, and biting all of that off in one go is a lot. So we said, let's narrow it down to 10 that you think are important, and we'll go through a prioritization exercise. I think the number one thing wouldn't surprise you, that's data and information management, with everybody being so focused on data as a strategic asset. But the number two that they actually rated, which surprised me, was stakeholder engagement. And they recognized the need to reach out internally and also externally. When you're a utility and you've got regulators and market groups and customers and stuff, stakeholder engagement is very important. And I think one of my colleagues has a phrase they say they didn't come up with, but I'm sure they did, and I keep quoting them. But it's from a change management perspective. What they said was value comes from what gets used, not from what gets built. So if you don't get stakeholders involved and understanding change and what that means for the people involved, they're going to keep doing things the old way. And we can look at where there are weaknesses and improvements and prudent investments to be made. But if we don't, as asset managers, if we don't involve those folks and engage them proactively, we're leaving a lot of benefits on the table. And it's the end of the definition of asset management in ISO 55000, right? It's to realize value from assets. If we're not doing that, then we're not doing a good job.
Yeah, so I had personal experience working for government contractors for several decades, as did Rich. With dealing with government property and different government agencies. And I was doing, for a long time, I did NASA support work in and around Goddard Space Flight Center. And when I took a new job as the first one, I was totally responsible, or the number one person responsible for the asset management system. And it turned out, we really needed to build a system from scratch. We didn't have the ISO 55000 model then, but we did have the government prescribed model from the Federal Acquisition Regulations. And the line I started using, dealing with a lot of scientists and engineers, was that if we have a good, logical, structured program, I don't think I use the word structured then, but if we have a good program, we can get 80% of the people and only have to deal with 20% of the people being problematic. But that if you have a poor attempt at doing it, you're still going to get 20% of the people who will follow you, but the other 80% are going to be working against you. And that does that resonate with you guys at all?
Yeah, I think a lot of times you get positions because somebody else failed. And sometimes, particularly if you go into a place where there's a failed system. And then once there's a failed system, particularly for the government property area with large corporations and such, then all of a sudden they get the attention of the vice president of operations, the vice president of finance, and they want this stuff fixed because the government may in fact be withholding payments. And those things, you know, the whole thing of the tone at the top really made a difference because there were weekly meetings with them. Where are we? What have we done? What do we need to happen? How do we engage other government property custodians, for example? And they got fairly hard nosed. You know that when it came with the vice president of operations, you know, he would ask, well, how's the attendance at the meetings? I said, well, so, pretty good. But there are a few people who don't show up. Well, who are they? Because they'll be on the layoff list. So he took it very seriously because his job was also impacted very seriously as well. His job was to fix that stuff. Same with the vice president of finance. Her job was to fix that. And therefore, once you have the tone at the top at a certain level, and things get serious, and at the same time where there's a rhythm, you know, once a week, once a month, or whatever, where you exercise the group, then things can become possible. I noticed with the Michigan folks that they talked about all the meetings they've had with people, you know, hundreds of thousands of people and such, to make sure everybody was on board with what they were trying to do. And that only happens if you're serious. If you show up and make the message and make folks accountable, then things can happen. On the other hand, if folks are not made accountable, it's not organized, people don't meet, the vision's not set, then it doesn't go as well.
Yeah, I think with asset management and with change management, I mean, top management engagement and sponsorship is critical.
Just one last story on that same, you know, iteration that I was speaking of, is we early on went to a staff meeting with the senior project manager of the biggest project, and you know, we were talking about asset management. Came back the next week, and he had given them, you know, his staff, and it was an in-person staff meeting, maybe 30, 40 people. And he had given him, you know, a task to do a specific thing. And he came back the next week. And after we talked, he looked at the guy and said, well, did you do what I asked you to do? And the guy went, no. And that was the last time anybody said no in one of his staff, to be sure. So let me switch directions here a little bit. Part of the theme that Mike's been working on and integrating is to learn from other countries. And I think, you know, we had the sessions with Eshe, who was a great facilitator, by the way. He is just awesome, I thought.
Agreed.
He's just knowledgeable and sharp and, you know, right on point. But people from Canada and Australia, not to shut out the Brits, but, you know, still Commonwealth here. But the presentations from the two cities in Australia, one in Victoria and one near Brisbane, were very impressive to me. In fact, I want to move to Geelong. I've driven by there, but I've never actually been there. Have any thoughts that stuck out to you guys from Australia or the Canada presentations?
I don't know about the Geelong one, but I was going to mention Ben Clark's presentation on Waterville, because I think that would have been a good segue from what we were talking about previously, because I think one of the things that he talked about was asset managers as communicators, and you know, that gets into the whole role of engagement, but also, you know, Mike and I have been talking about, you know, the role of leadership within asset management. And yeah, I think the key word for leadership, again, is embedded in the definition, in that coordination, and you can't have good coordination without communication. So you know, I think the Australians have actually, they do a lot of cool stuff, and a lot of different disciplines, you know, asset management, risk management. Their energy markets are kind of interesting, just from the sheer physical challenges they have, to deal with in sort of distance and population density. There's a lot we can learn from some of the work they do down there, I think.
To me, it looked like a lot of those places were very nice places to live. I was reading this morning, those are also some of the most expensive places in the world to live in Australia.
Oh, really?
And it happens to be that Pittsburgh is the cheapest place to live. So,
Are you saying you're cheap?
no, I live well. Value for money. How's that? I thought that the presentation, Elon, I guess it was, is that she had as much on one chart about her system, about as much as any I've seen as far as the numbers and where and that sort of thing, and had all that in one place that you could see it in about 5 minutes and kind of understand what they were dealing with. That was a testament of how organized they were. And again, had to do with data, what they were managing and the data about the things that which were managing. And also some of those charts indicated where they were as far as projects, what were they behind on, the capital projects and such. That was also very impressive. But the fact is that in order to make decisions, you have to have good data. And it seems that they were making sure they had good data and the tools, in fact, to which to receive that. And that is, I think, though, too, is key. If you don't have good data, it's awfully hard to make good decisions and also to justify and substantiate what you're doing.
Yeah, well, let's say there's two different directions I want to go. Let's go with the data one. Boyd and was talking about data a little bit in the chat, and Mark, you were talking about the importance of data earlier. And one of the themes I was paying attention to as people were talking about implementing this was, do you start with the assets? Do you start with the data? Or do you start with strategy? It's like my analogy that came to my head was, I'm going to take a trip. What do I buy first? What do I do first? Buy a car or a map? It's, where do you start?
You're pushing all my hot buttons. So I know we're trying to review the the summit, but I mean, I'm not sure there's a good answer or a single answer to your questions there, but I think the questions are excellent. And as somebody who goes in to help organizations do what you're asking, it really depends, right? I mean, ideally, you'd want a policy and then roll it down into strategy and into asset management plans. But most people who decide they want to take on a more formalized approach to asset management have been doing some sort of asset management and maintenance for decades, and they're in the middle of lots of life cycles. And where do you start? I mean, it's a good question. I mean, you've kind of got to look at what are the upcoming investments, what are the in-flight programs, and what problems have they been having? And I mean, you have to tackle some of these in parallel, I honestly think. But I mean, it does come back to ultimately the data, because in the end, you're trying to make better decisions and you want to be transparent with your stakeholders, whether they're your investors, your board, customers, that you're making wise investments. And it's increasingly being data driven. And if you can quantify that and show where the data came from, then that helps. But, you've got automatically collected data from sensors and devices like that, and you've still got the manual inputs from processes, and you want to get rid of the gaps in your data and you want to have good data quality. But if you go through that cleansing exercise but you still don't have good manual data collection, you're just going to get dirtier and dirtier data over time, by which point you've put in higher speed, more automated decision-making processes, and they're just making really quick decisions based on bad data, which is a bad combination. So I think maintaining that data cleanliness and quality is a key factor.
One thing, that there are multiple frameworks to operate from. I was reading this morning, for example, the value stream. Well, the value stream starts with a customer and ends with a customer. And your value is defined by the customer. And if the customer is not willing to pay for certain things, that it has no value to them, then the customer generally doesn't want to pay for it. And so that's one way of looking at, do you buy the car or the map first? Or do you watch the movie first? Determine as to where's the value that you want to achieve and see, experience. And then from that, determine what kind of infrastructure you have to have in order to achieve that. But they're intertwined. You know, they're different strands in different directions that you can measure each of. And it's very similar to, Jim, a few years ago when we did maturity model for asset management. We recognized that there were two things to worry about. They worry about the infrastructure. Then we're worried about the throughput through the infrastructure. And you have to take a look at each individually, then eventually see how they interact. And so but you can't just jump between infrastructure and throughput simultaneously. You got to figure out and do both of them well. And so I think that is something that is all through this, but it does kind of get mixed up, and it's easy to get mixed up. What are we dealing with?
Yeah. Well, there's so many things I'd like to say, but we don't have too much time left, and I wanted to bring John Chilness on to get a couple comments from John here before we get done. But I wanted to while Kevin brings John on, I did want to, we haven't talked much about the transportation panel and the GAO panel. And it occurs to me that one takeaway from those was look at the senior leaders involved in this. We're not talking about solely asset management professionals trying to make it happen. These are senior leaders in organizations and people, well placed within organizations, and GAO people at the director level. So it's impressive what they're working on and the messages they had to offer. Well, John, let me welcome John Chilness, who's a member of the Asset Leadership Network. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How about you?
I'm good. I had a flash on like Bill Maher bringing in the special guest at the end.
Well, that's okay.
Bill Maher. But so what did you have any quick thoughts you'd like to share about the event? I know you attended all or most of the events.
Yeah. I try to tune in as much as I can to all of these because I was just mentioning to my wife, who's in the next room, that I'm a bit of an outsider in the industry and have a somewhat different perspective on things. I know that I've attempted to engage. I'm from Iowa. I live in Des Moines, and I've attempted to engage with our state auditor to have them take more interest in assets. I've attempted to engage with our business school at our local university about developing a asset management program. And that what you touched on is that somehow the management of real property or personal property rather, or real property has for decades kind of been missed. And it's really, given that I'm sort of a bit of, like I said, a bit of an outsider, it's so reassuring to see that there is movement in this area, whether it's the Michigan Infrastructure Council or what's happening in Australia. There is a movement afoot to take asset planning more seriously. And I think that's just fabulous.
Well, we can go into overtime for a few minutes, but let's give Kevin a chance to bring our 30 minutes to its usual conclusion, and then we'll go on for a few minutes, and maybe we'll get Jack Kelly to join us too.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. As Jim mentioned, we will continue after this and go into overtime, but really quickly, thank you for letting me step in, and once again, thank our patron members as well as our organizational members. This program, as well as all of our other programs, would not be possible without their support. So check out some of our other programs that they support, like the summit you've been hearing so much about today. And back to you, gentlemen.
All right, then maybe we'll bring Jack on if you could. We'll see what Jack had a fairly detailed answer to what we were just talking about in the chat area. And thanks to Mark, who's is a 1898 is also a member organization, so we appreciate that, Mark. So, so Mark, any other further thoughts on that you think you wanted to get in about the summit this week?
Actually, yes. I know one of the things that Mike brought up to me, and you actually just mentioned before the end there, Jim, was the international collaboration. And I think with what the US can learn from other countries, but what other countries can perhaps learn from the US as well. I mean, we're all at different kind of levels of maturity. We're all being driven by different challenges. One of the things I didn't put on my titles, I guess, at the beginning was that I'm part of the IAM's knowledge leadership group, which is actually led by Mildred, who you all, I think, know well. But my role within that group is essentially trying to coordinate areas for knowledge development between the international chapters of the IAM. And I think between Mildred and I, it would be good if we could come up with a list of some of those and actually bring it back, and we can talk about that more, perhaps in another one of these sessions. It's been a little bit difficult getting what are the top priorities for the various different national groups over the last couple of years, because we're all just crazy busy with stuff. And but yeah, in terms of what we're looking at, we have very different challenges globally, and we've got different levels of expertise. And I think what we have to do, is find out who's ahead of the curve and see what we can learn from them, as well as who's made mistakes, if they're willing to share them, because that's the best way to avoid them. See what somebody else has got wrong and don't do the same thing.
For sure. Jack Kelly, are you able to join us? And if you're talking, you're on mute. Yeah, well, perhaps not. We'll circle back. How about you, Rich? Any other, further?
Yeah, I think a lot of times you think and see things over the years, and those same thoughts come out. One of the things that I was able to put into one of the appendices of ISO 55010, as an example of how to use ISO, was in fact to make sure that the person who's leading the asset management function and such is a high-powered person. And that's what the vice president of Jacobs said also, consulting firm, seeing a whole lot of different things, how things work or don't work. She thought that should be a C-level position. And I agree with that. I think that there's probably a importance to have a C-level position that looks at internal controls, as well as perhaps ethics, some other things that are bundled with that, to make sure things are working properly. And to make sure the overall team is doing things in the best interest of the organization versus the best interest of their own fiefdom, you might say. And that can sort some of that stuff out to make sure things stay on course. And at the same time, where those folks don't decide, well, we need more budget, so we'll reduce the asset management staff. That's, you can do that. It's like losing weight. You can chop off your head too, but it won't do it well after that. And so I thought, some of those thoughts that get reverberated and understood. And we saw that with the GAO folks, the high-powered folks from GAO. And again, reinforced by the folks from Michigan and some of the others that to do this right, you have to have the power to do it, and you have to have longevity to do it, and commitment throughout the whole organization. And you can only do that at a higher level, not at the lower level.
That's good. Jack, you joined us.
Yes, thank you for your patience.
Oh, no problem. Just any, what would you like to share about your thoughts about the summit?
Well, I was blown away by the summit. I mean, these were some of the most, I mean, we've had a series of really amazing, webinars and presentations at our conferences, but I think the presentations we had the last 2 days for our summit were the best I've ever seen. I mean, they're great, focused examples of people that really understand asset management are well along the path of being effective in having asset management programs. I think they could be the basis of the kind of case studies that we've been talking about for such a long time, because these are exactly the kind of stories that we want to showcase to as wide an audience as we can possibly do that to. And to John's point earlier, it's one of the things that I'm excited about, and the summit was a great example, is how enthusiastic and how widespread at the adoption of asset management is beyond what most of us are aware of. And so one of the things that I know you're very involved in as part of being on the US TAG, and also our little working group on Mirror Committee 3. We're beginning to do something in the United States to really shine a light on who is involved in asset management in the United States. It's, we're not quite ready to share it yet, but the basic idea is, let's take that list of known certified organizations that TC 251 has had for quite a few years now, and let's create our own list that we're calling the Community of Asset Management Practitioners in the US. And it's to be able to say, okay, wherever you are in your asset management journey, we'd like you to tell us that you're where you are, and we'd like you to join our community and be present and be available to other people who want to learn from you, and kind of build a momentum for moving forward. So it's not just you have to get certified. It's maybe you're already working at a level that conforms to the standard, but you don't want to get certified. That's a circumstance that we have in Canada, where they have so many of the municipalities in Canada are well along and have been well along the asset management journey for a long, long time, but most of them see no value in being certified. Where we have what we learned about Portland. I mean, I never knew about Portland before, and yet they're well along as well. So, I think there are many, many wonderful stories to tell, in addition to the amazing stories that we heard the last 2 days. And I think that, if we're successful in doing what we're trying to do with the US TAG, we'll be helping people tell those stories better.
John, any other thought you wanted to share?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to add to what both Jack and Rich are talking about, which is kind of goes back to my earlier statement that when I talk to people at the university level or the state level, they don't have a holistic view of asset management. And I really am so impressed and honored to be a part of the group, because every time I listen to a talk, I feel like there is an expansion of definitions, of understanding, of a culture of asset management that did not exist as well, a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, as it does now. And that the efforts of all of you and the different guests that come on, it's kind of it's good for me to see really almost history in the making, in a way that, maybe in our lifetime, we'll see assets, personal assets and real assets taken more seriously than they are now.
John, let me share a story with you that from some work I was doing within Working Group 7, which is the working group that's developed a new asset management standard for how governments can be more engaged in asset management. And one of my colleagues who was from Argentina we were talking about how to get different stakeholders involved in in their public policy making processes. And he said, you know, in Argentina, we have 5 organizations that are certified to ISO 55001. And one of those organizations is certified because of our university here. Our university here had a really good course in asset management, and the people who were high up senior officials in that organization had taken those courses, and they appreciated the value of asset management based on their academic backgrounds. And so it's like, yes, academia can make a big difference. And that's something that I think it would be wonderful if we could engage more universities in understanding how they can make a difference.
Absolutely. I was just looking up one thing here that I wanted to mention, is that we talked about, we didn't talk about, well, just looking through the list and see anybody we forgot, but Ian Cranston as a part of the Michigan group was really impressive. Hugh Sinclair, you know, amazing. Yeah, gentleman from Kyle from the GFOA, we hope to be working with. We didn't talk about Cameron Ospig and Jack Dempsey in the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Really impressive. The one I was looking for particularly was Chris Chen from, not to leave anybody else out, sorry if I missed any names, but from Asset Management Ontario. That's one in particular that I want to go back and see the things he was talking about. Just seemed to be lots of good points and interesting things to inform where we are going forward.
And Mike or Nick did a great job of putting in links to a lot of the documents, the key documents that they were talking about. And so Ontario had this asset management policy that's available. I haven't been able to download it yet, but I tend to.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, and I was on the National Academies of website downloading one of the documents that was referenced in that presentation earlier today, because I saw a place I worked was mentioned in one of their slides, which piqued my interest. So I had to go look at some of the work they were doing.
So I see another of our senior fellows, Art Kirtland, is online, is in attendance, and we bring him on, but I think the screen's full and we shouldn't talk forever. But Art is mentioning the advantages of certification. As first as an independent review, can support opportunities for improvement. And the certification helps ensure stakeholders outside the organization of a verified review. I think it's both really well said. Final thoughts, anyone, before we?
Yeah, I actually wanted to just jump on something that Jack said that I thought was really important, because I think we tend to look at certification as the goal, but I think I'm seeing a lot of organizations that are stating that they want to be aligned with ISO 55000, so they may not be ready for certification, but more and more people adopting the standard and following, that as guidelines, I think is really critical. And I think ultimately a lot of those may decide to get to certification, which is kind of better because that's not your goal. It's just a result of what you're doing and the improvements you're making. And to Art's point, I think for some industries, we'll be seeing in a few years potentially, better insurance rates for some companies because they've got demonstrable, quantifiable processes for reducing risk.
Yeah, very good. I did want to mention, John brought up personal property, which is where I kind of grew up in asset management, of course. And I did note the director from GAO that was responsible for federal buildings, among other things, and federal personal property. And I mean, obviously, the focus right now is, for the last couple of years have been federal buildings. I think now the focus is infrastructure. But I think we need to start, and I think ALN could play a role and helping to queue up personal property is an important topic, and how it interplays with both of those and is a topic unto itself. Most people, like for the federal government, most people would imagine that the amount of personal property in the US government, just on what they have today, exceeds, in dollar value, exceeds the amount of real property. And then you think the personal property, the real property, let's say it has a life of 30 years, and the real property, the personal property, let's say even has a life of 5 years, which is long for a lot of that, that's really 6 times as much. So if it's more on a current basis and is 6 times as much altogether, maybe it's something you should be paying attention to. So I think we have a point of contact now at GAO, and I think it's time to get some of those pieces together. So John, we'll be looking for your voice involved in that. And,
Well, I want to jump in on that point, Jim, because I think one of the problems we've had in the U.S. government is making a separate distinction between personal property and real property, and not looking at property holistically. One of the things that you've probably heard me say, and understandably might have forgotten it, in the many conversations we've had, is that when I went back and looked at the scope of the various ISO 55001 certificates that I was able to review as part of when I was off on that down that rabbit hole, as you would like to say, looking at all that stuff, is the vast majority of ISO certifications, the scope of the assets in their asset management systems are focused on personal property. They're not focused on real property. So, or it could be infrastructure. In fact, just think about the Atlanta airport. The Atlanta airport, one of the big items in its scope of assets that it was certified to was vertical transportation. We're talking, escalators and elevators. And that's personal property. And so we have a lot of personal property that is understood by organizations to be mission critical. And in fact, that's what ART's whole sort of certification is based on, is personal property. So personal property has played a much greater role in mission accomplishment than it gets credit for.
interesting. All right, last chance before we sign off.
Yeah, I want to say a little bit about what following from a check about getting certified or not certified. I like to equate this, if you want to really get good at something, get a teacher. If you want to be a good singer, you better have a coach that helps you to make sure you're as good as you think you are. Now, here again, you may want to do that in private, where there can be honest discussions. But ultimately, you get better with third-party understanding, third-party review. And here again, you have to have a deal with your boss. Doesn't turn well, don't fire me. Because there has to be a certain amount of trust involved in doing that. But the fact is, it's well worth having that, because that type of friction will make the organization much better. Because new people see things differently from those who've been growing up in it. So that value.
All right. Well, thanks again to all of our panelists today, and including our people that kindly agreed to join us as we went on, to John and Jack, but to Mark and Rich, thank you so much. To Kevin for being our technical person today. He's only been with us a short while, and he's already got it down. He's a pro. And thank you to those who are attending and listening today, and thanks to those that watch this on YouTube or from our website in the future. I hope everyone has a great day, and join us for ALN Thursday at 3 next Thursday. Thanks, and have a great day.